The online battles by Anonymous against Russia are continuing. This is the subject of a report that we published this morning on CNBC.com that analyzes Anonymous's claims over the past 5 months. And in doing so, we kind of realized there are 6 main strategies that they're employing. And we worked with cyber intelligence specialists to rank them in order of effectiveness. Now, we found by far the potential for the most damage is from the hacking of large Russian databases. So once the hackers get inside, they can delete data, they can take it and post it online. They've done both. We don't know how much data has been destroyed, but we do know that the amount that's been leaked online has been massive.
What is a UFO hacker? In this episode, we take a look into the worlds of UAP and cutting-edge technology with guest Thom Hastings, a senior security engineer. Thom brings a really unique perspective on the rapidly evolving fields of UAP research, offering insights into the intersections of hacking and data analysis. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Thom, thank you so much for joining me on Rebelliously Curious. A few months ago, or not, I guess not a few months ago, about November of last year, we met at Seoul and you came up to me and we were having a conversation about hacking, but UFO hacking. And I remember going, this is so cool. This would be such a great podcast to do. And thankfully you decided you would do one with me. But I love that we're getting into the whole nitty gritties around hacking and then UAP. Just so people know, your background is you're a senior security engineer. And so you have a history around UFO hacking. But first I'd say thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chrissy. Yeah, and just to go into my background a little bit, I got introduced to computer programming at a very early age in elementary school, and was taught outside of school by a neighbor, and started writing computer programs, and was in gifted programs and writing computer programs in those and stuff, and by the time I got to middle school, my school started a laptop program. So I got my first laptop, and that was when I started hacking. And so this was around the 2000 to 2002 timeframe. And I did exploits to change my grades in English. All through middle school and high school, I got in trouble every single year for hacking something on the school network. I actually eventually got kicked out my senior year and had to get a GED for all the trouble I'd gotten into in hacking. So I I joke that I'm like a high school dropout, didn't finish college, college dropout. Someday I'll drop out of grad school too. I don't know. And but I've kind of sort of lucked into this career in cybersecurity, it's just been something that's always been interesting to me, kind of a special interest of sorts. UAP are also a special interest, and so the intersection of hacking and UFOs are sort of my special interest.
It's so cool. And also, like, the best person to work for security, any type of online security, is obviously hackers, right? Like, why not hire technically the person that knows how to hack your system? I think it's so cool. I have a little soft spot for hackers. My best friend knows how to hack, and she would talk about it. Marie's talked about it with me all the time, where she used to hack back in the day, and she was really tapped into the 4chan network as well. But we'll get into that. My first question to you is, maybe let's do this. Let's start by breaking down what is hacking, just so for people that are like, yeah, I've heard it. I know kind of what hacking is. It's, people that are online getting into like government systems or other corporate systems. But how do you define hacking as a former hacker?
Yeah. So the term hacking comes from MIT. It actually comes from the Model Train Club at MIT, where they would set up uh, uh, things so that you could call in over the phones and change the like switches for the routing of the model trains. And the origin of the term hacking. And I like I do use it in the colloquial sense where it's used to in a kind of in the vernacular. It's always used to describe like a computer intrusion. But this actually been a point of much debate in the hacker community going back historically. Um, uh, I like to think of hacking as primarily computer programming, like any computer programming or coding, I would consider hacking. Um, but there's also, I think there's other types of hacking. Actually, if you don't mind, I could pull up a couple really good quotes
Yeah, go for
that
it.
define hacking and the hacker spirit. The first one is from a hacker named Acorn, and the quote is, "Hacking is being curious and extremely stubborn."
And
And
persistent.
then, yeah, exactly. The other one is a hacker is any person who derives joy from discovering novel ways to circumvent limitations. Although usually applied to computers, every profession has its hackers. That's from Bob Bickford at actually the oldest hacking conference in the world, which is called Hackers. It's an invite-only conference in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Knowing about hacking a little bit and talking about it with one of my best friends and how she used to hack with 4chan or was part of the 4chan community, but went to 4chan because of hacking, which I think is really interesting. Can we talk a little bit about 4chan and then how 4chan moved into Anonymous, which is like a really massive group? And I think it was in the early 2000s or it might have been mid 2000s when Anonymous was really, really large, but it started from 4chan. Can you give me a little bit of a background on 4chan if you have it, and then how it moved to Anonymous, and then how Anonymous is such a group of really intelligent and smart and very persistent hackers that are looking for social change compared to maybe what some would think. I know that could probably be debated too, because I know 4chan had a debate there if they were actually doing social change or not. But let's start off with just generally how 4chan moved into being anonymous and how hackers played a part in that.
Sure. So 4chan was started by someone named Moop, and I'm sorry, Moot rather, Moot, and they visited Japan and found something called 2channel or 2chan in Japan, which was an image board. It was basically a very simple forum where you could just post images and text. And they created a clone of it that they called 4chan, and created a version for the United States, and became a very popular. And when you post on 4chan, you can give yourself a name or you can post anonymously. And when you post with the name anonymous, it became this sort of amorphous self-referential community of like someone would ask for a specific thing like, oh, do you have that one picture of this one thing? And then someone would post it, and then someone would reply, anonymous delivers. And then there would be this initially it was an image of like a green man, like, and there was an image of him like delivering a pizza, like anonymous delivers. And then as anonymous evolved, 4chan was involved in a number of hacks. Um, uh, uh, some of these were mischievous, some of these were raids. They would like kind of organize activity, kind of in a mischievous sense. They would all go to like I think Habbo Hotel was one of them, like this a popular like a kind of kids game site, and they would all go at the same time and cause chaos, and it was kind of disruptive, and they had fun doing this and doing And they would also flood a website with traffic, do denial of service and things like that. Some of that was automated, some of it was using botnets, and anonymous. Um, uh, for example, I think it was the 2008 election. Someone hacked Sarah Palin's email address and posted her password on 4chan. And then and then of course it was like locked down right away. But it was this big thing, like someone hacked Sarah Palin's email and then posted it on 4chan, and that was the way they chose to like tell people about it. Um, and it was quickly locked down because people were everyone was trying to log in at once they posted it. But that was sort of like a venue for, and there's actually like a long history of hacking when you talk about disclosure. And so in the hacking community, there's terms like 0 day for a 0 day vulnerability that's just been released, or a previously unknown vulnerability. And there's mailing lists that go way back, like the full disclosure mailing list in the hacking community. Full disclosure refers to the idea of, well, put all the vulnerabilities out there, like if you know a way into a system, release the vulnerability, make them fix it by telling everyone that their what their weakness is. And that's actually evolved into what is today, what is referred to as commonly referred to as responsible disclosure. It's actually what's called coordinated disclosure, where if a security researcher finds a vulnerability in a website or a product or something like that, they engage with the company itself, get that company to issue a patch or a fix, and then do this coordinated disclosure later of like, well, it's been fixed now, but this is what the problem that I discovered was, and then they can do a write-up, and this is a way to sort of, I've done this. I mean, I found a vulnerability in the U.S. government website, gsa.gov, for the General Services Administration. And I coordinated with them, responsibly told them what the vulnerability was. They patched it. And now I can talk about it. But
It's so
um,
wild.
yeah.
So
Um,
I think let's stop there for 1 second because I like to dive a little bit deeper into that because it's, you're not, I don't talk to people every day. I talk to people and every day I do talk to people every day, but I don't talk to people every day about the sensitivities within government website. I talk to a lot of government officials or former government officials and politicians and scientists, but knowing that you have these online sensitivities and you can have a lot of control by being able to know that, right? And having an independent person, a civilian being able to go in and tamper with that. That's pretty scary. And if the average person can do that and find that, that's extremely good at hacking. For sure that it's a major vulnerability that needs to be looked after. So with that said, when you're finding all of those vulnerabilities within American government, I would imagine that there is some ways to go about doing it. And then also have has this ever really been done consistently within a UAP framework?
yeah. So to talk about the UAP stuff, which is what I'm really interested in,
For sure.
um, the UFO hackers that we know about. So a lot of people in the UFO community know about Gary McKinnon because his case was very public. He's a hacker from the UK. He was arrested in 2002 for hacking into the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Department of Defense, and NASA, looking for evidence of UFOs. And I can talk plenty about him. But what most people in the UFO community do not remember is that prior to Gary McKinnon, there were a number of other hackers. There was a hacker by the name of Matthew Bevan, also from the UK in the mid 90s. And he hacked into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as well as a number of other Air Force bases. But he says he saw plans for an anti-gravity drive. Um, there and I've been in contact with both Gary and Matthew by email. They were they both knew about this earliest hacker who is the most interesting to me. We only know his alias. This hacker went by the alias Quentin, and uh, in 1992 appeared on the news program NBC Dateline with his face darkened out and his voice changed, and talked about how he had uh, browsed government files on UFOs, hacked into senators' computer systems, and gone snooping in our nation's military networks. And Quentin's some of Quentin's work was later published in an e-zine, a hacker e-zine called Frack Magazine, Phrak. And Frack was an e-zine that started in the 80s, with kind of like phone phreaking and stuff. And it grew out of similar zines like 2600. This is all kind of hacker history. I'm happy to go into it. Um, so Frack was a very famous magazine when they published this list of IP addresses of secret networks, NASA networks, military networks, national labs. It kind of gave a list of targets that then um, uh, Matthew Bevan and Gary McKinnon looked over. And what was fascinating to me from talking to these guys, Gary said, "Yeah, I remember the Quentin documents. There's some overlaps between the that document from 1990. It was actually published in 1993, and what I found in my travels." So I went and I compared them, and I found, these same IP ranges that are in Gary McKinnon's indictment, because this is a whole nother story. When Gary McKinnon was arrested in 2002, his indictment was published online, but it was redacted. And it had the IP addresses of the specific places he was charged with hacking into 97 systems, and all of those IP addresses were redacted. Well, they weren't redacted properly. In the PDF, you could highlight the text behind the black square and cut and paste it, and you could get the IP addresses out of it.
No
And
way.
yeah, and there's before WikiLeaks, there's a website called CryptoMe. CryptoMe published the unredacted indictment with all of the IP addresses. So anyway, I went back and I compared those IP addresses to the ones from the Quentin document, and yeah, they both targeted NASA Ames at Moffett Field. They both targeted Army Fort, I believe it was Fort Irwin in Barstow, California. And they both targeted the Pentagon IP ranges. So, uh, yeah, and so there, and I, I could be really nerdy about this because
No, go for it.
especially.
Geek out. I'm like, that's like 100%. I'm like, because I think the history aspect of this is so important because it's not really talked about a lot. Like we hear so much about government and counterintelligence. We don't hear about what's actually, going on with hackers and how they're finding information outside of people looking at issuing FOIA reports, right?
Yeah, yeah, and FOIA is a wonderful tool.
It's the legal way.
Yeah. um,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Gary McKinnon's most of his documents are still they're considered to be related to an active investigation, even though this was more than 20 years ago. John Greenwald has tried to FOIA Gary McKinnon's documents, and they say it's related to an ongoing matter, and at least at NASA, the response he got from NASA recently was that it's related to an ongoing matter, and so they can't disclose anything through FOIA. Um,
Why NASA
uh,
though?
why?
Why, yeah, why not specifically NASA? Why not any other department?
Well, that was the response I saw on Twitter that John Greenwald got from NASA's Inspector General office, which was the one he FOIA'd regarding Gary McKinnon's hack of NASA. And Gary McKinnon's hack of NASA is probably the one that he's most famous for. He watched Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project in I think it was 2001, and there was an ex-NASA employee named Donna Hare who came forward and talked about UAP being airbrushed out of NASA photography at Building 8 at Johnson Space Center in NASA in Houston. And so he targeted Houston, and that's also in the indictment. And he looked at the NetBIOS names and found that they had a naming convention that told you which building the computers were in. So he knew how to target the computers specifically at Building 8 from the NetBIOS names. And Gary McKinnon's hacks, by his own admission, were not very sophisticated. He was using, and this is also like to tell my story. I'm in middle school and I'm hacking all sorts of stuff on my school network. I'm using the same unsophisticated techniques that Gary McKinnon used to hack into NASA. We're talking about things like default passwords, like administrator or the word password, or even just blank, like default Windows NT 2000 installs had a blank administrator password. And so this is just how bad security was at that point in time. And I caused all sorts of havoc on my school network while Gary McKinnon was causing havoc in the same way at NASA and the Navy and other areas. So he targeted Building 8 at Johnson Space Center and got into a computer where on the desktop there were two folders. There was a folder called raw and there was a folder called processed, or it was called unprocessed and processed or something like that. And and he opens up the raw folder, and the images are in a proprietary NASA format. They only open in the special software that is on that computer that he's remoted into using a desktop program called Remotely Anywhere. Um, and he's over dial-up, so his connection is super slow, and these images are really big, so he wouldn't be able to download it in time. So what he does is he lowers his screen resolution and he lowers his color depth to like so it's all like grayscale and like really low resolution, and then opens up the program to look at one of these unprocessed pictures. And he and be and he's because Donna Hare, the who worked in a NASA photo lab and testified at the Disclosure Project, that this is where they were airbrushing out photos, and he pulls up one of the raw ones, and it starts to load, and he sees like a silhouette of a planet, looks like an atmosphere, like probably Earth. And then what he starts to see in front of it is a white, cylindrical, cigar-shaped object with geodesic domes above and below that look kind of like radar domes. He says it was smooth and had no rivets, and he's awestruck, hasn't realized that he's in the UK and he's got his time zones wrong because he was always hacking at odd hours, and someone in the United States was on that computer at the time, and according to Gary, he saw the cursor go to the network icon and hit disconnect. And that's not the only thing Gary found. He says that on a NASA system, he found spreadsheets with names. One of them was called Fleet to Fleet Transfers, with names of ships that weren't U.S. Navy ships. So he believes there's a secret space program and that these are ships from that secret space fleet. A counter argument is that this may have been some type of military war game with fictional, names of ships. He also says he found a spreadsheet that was titled non-terrestrial officers. A list
Wild.
of non-terrestrial officers. Now, does that mean sea-based as opposed to land-based or something like that? Maybe it's open to interpretation. But yeah, I mean, this is the non-terrestrial officers, fleet-to-fleet transfers, and the cigar-shaped craft on a NASA computer were the things that Gary found. And I heard about these in the 2000s. And because I was using the same hacking techniques at around the same time, that's what got me interested in UAP. That's what got me interested in UFOs, was because I knew that at least on a technical level, Gary's hacks were plausible. And
And
so
yeah,
I
it's
started,
possible.
yeah, yeah. And of course, the U.S. Government spent over a dozen years, about a dozen years, trying to extradite Gary McKinnon to try him for to prosecute him and put him away for like up to 80 years in American prison. This was very difficult emotionally on Gary at fighting this legal battle for so long and not sure what his fate would be. And and it was very public as well. They got the Daily Mail involved in the UK and had a very public campaign to save Gary McKinnon and prevent him from being extradited. And eventually, it was in 2012 that the decision came down not to extradite him. Um, so yeah, his case is the most public, but people forget about Matthew Bevan, and no one even knows who Quentin is. So Quentin's real identity. Um, uh, and so this is what I geek out about. I would love, it's kind of like my journalistic white whale to like find out who Quentin was and maybe talk to him, interview him about what he found back in the early 90s. Because if you read the text file that he released, it includes something called SCI net for Secret Compartmented Information Network, and DISNet, like a integrated system network, and these military networks that I've been able to confirm did exist. They've since been replaced by SIPRNet and JWICs, which are the ones in use today. But in the early 90s, the secret networks, um, uh, uh, those IP addresses were published, and some of the NetBIOS names were published in this Frack magazine article in 1993.
It's so wild. And so hold on. So we don't know who Quentin is. There, I would imagine the reason why he doesn't come forward is that he'd probably be prosecuted still.
Yeah, so the statute of limitations is passed, and I've followed up a few leads on Quentin. One, I contacted the editor of Frack magazine, and his name is Chris Goggins. He went by the hacker name Eric Bloodaxe, and he said that he told me a few things. One, he doesn't have access to the email archives from Frack from 1993 to look at that or figure out Quentin's old email address or anything like that. Um, he also said that Quentin usually he had one or two friends in the hacker scene that he usually worked with as accomplices on whatever he was working on at the time. So Quentin may have had one or two accomplices in his hacking. And uh, part of my reason for like coming on this podcast and starting to talk about this more and putting my website ufohackers.org together is to really get uh like to get the message out there, like, Quentin, if you're listening, um uh uh I'd love to talk to you. Just imagine what it would be like to have him come forward and talk as well. Yeah, it's Matthew Bevan admitted when he hacked into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that he wasn't sure if the documents that he found were supposed to be found, that they were put there in a honeypot, um, so that they could be distributed as misinformation, so that if someone hacked them, whether it was a foreign government or something, they would get bad information from the system that he got into, again, very easily, I think also with a blank password. And but Matthew Bevin says that he likes to think that what he saw was not misinformation. Um, I've also heard from another hacker source who was in in the UK scene at the same time as Matthew Bevin, and he now this hacker has now done work for the UK government. So yeah, I can't give I wasn't able to get I can't tell you who it is, but they uh, said that the documents that Matthew Bevin shared on IRC had been previously released on Art Bell's radio show. So, there's a lot of like, uh, 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 mystery, I guess you could say. And that's a part of what keeps me engaged in it, is trying to figure out who Quentin was, what the validity of the documents are. I just found out recently about a hacker named Keith Madak, who supposedly hacked into Westinghouse Electric, and found research they were doing on a strange power source. And so, that's something that I'm looking into now. But yeah, um, uh, it's like I said, this is just my special interest.
Yeah, it's so awesome though. Well, and again, like it's not, you don't meet hackers every day that may be specifically interested in UAP too. And, I always say there's a job for everybody in this subject, no matter what. Where are we today with hacking in the UAP subject? Because I remember you saying in the 90s it was really easy to hack, a lot easier than it is now. So we don't really hear about hackers like we did back then. So what is happening in the hacker scene and then adjacent to UAP? Where are they?
Yeah, yeah, and you talked about anonymous too. In the 2010s, there was certainly a rise in anonymous, and groups like lulzsec, which was a specific group within anonymous, and hacks like that. The what is hacking like today? Hacking is um, it's it's different.
It's evolved,
It's
I would have imagined, right?
yeah.
Like any industry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's evolved. And it is an industry, absolutely. Cybersecurity is a huge industry. There's a huge need for cybersecurity. There's so many companies that are involved in cybersecurity now. Um, I've worked as a cybersecurity consultant. I've worked for offensive security groups. I've worked on red teams. I've even worked as a private investigator and done open source intelligence. Um, and so it's been a great, career path for me. But the 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 industry and the scene, I would say, are are more closely related. It used to be very much like there was like a hacker underground, and then there was like an information security profession, and they had kind of a different ethos, and they seem to be more closely related now. They're still, like essentially a lot of the hackers have been hired. Um, so
Everybody got a job because before,
yeah.
yeah, there wasn't, well, I guess cybersecurity wasn't on the top of everyone's head consistently, because it was just so new, right? And you only had a smaller group of people that were probably able to do it compared to now having a major populace that's able to do it, right? Like there's so many more people that would be able to hack,
Yeah,
and understand
yeah,
cybersecurity very well. Yeah.
that's true. The technology has been very democratized. The tools are easier to come by. There's a term in the hacker community, script kiddie, A script kiddie is someone who just uses other people's hacking programs but doesn't write their own. I self-identify as a recovering script kiddie, because that's I was when I started in middle school, and I kind of still am in a lot of ways. um I kind of just, I just, always a noob, always so much more to learn. Another As someone who really likes just learning new things, this is it's something that you can never really master. You can maybe specialize and things like that, but there's a lot of deep knowledge that goes into cybersecurity. The hacks are they have to be more sophisticated these days. They have to involve bypassing protections. They have to involve um, you know, there there are uh, in the early days, it was very easy to get into a lot of things with blank and anonymous passwords. There were open FTP servers that you could log into anonymously and just get all sorts of files from. You don't see those types of things that these days. Um,
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think didn't Doge do an accidental dump on of like a whole bunch of information on their website, or there was some kind of security breach that happened recently with Doge and Elon Musk, and I think it was reported about a week or two ago
Was
after.
this the Doge employee who posted stuff on his GitHub? Okay. Yeah, because I yeah, there's a lot of cybersecurity news, and to be um I'm not it's quite possible because some of the employees at Doge are quite young. And I know one of them uh uh came out of a hacking community called the Com. Um or the short for the community. And it's this group of like kind of nefarious scammers and doxers and ransomware gangs. And um,
The headline here from the Economic Times just says, and there's a couple of these too, but it says Elon Musk Dodge website security breach, how a federal website was left open for public edits. And then there's been some other headlines here from MSNBC that says, I know, right? It's crazy town. And it says
you
Elon
know,
Musk Doge is executing a historically a dangerous data breach. It's like, whoa, like, for any hacker, welcome to like your jackpot, right? For anyone, and also anyone that's interested, also media, all of us, like it's such a gold mine, but at the same time, it's so scary for national security, our own risk. And then all of that information potentially being sold to foreign adversaries or around the world or even internally, right? You can get terrorism,
yeah,
you get internal terrorism. Like there's so much of that, especially. And like, come on, Elon Musk. Like you
yeah,
would think that would
yeah.
be the number one thing that you would not do.
Well, and from the national security perspective, I've heard that cyber operations against Russia have been ordered to stand down. Um, so I can tell you that Russia is not going to stop their cyber operations against us.
Are
So it's
you
kind of
serious?
just,
I didn't know that they were told to stand down. It sounds
yeah,
pretty fitting after a nice security breach for a little bit, knowing that your foreign adversary could potentially go on the site in any moment and maybe did know, this is just alleged in my opinion, but you tell them to stand down, but then also now you're opening it up for them to be able to take information. It's
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
wild.
it's kind of just, bending over, but sorry.
But
Yeah.
no, it's so totally okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Bending over backwards there, for to give open up the door for Russia. Um, yeah, and so the I thought we might end up talking about a little bit about, current cyber warfare and what are called APTs, or advanced persistent threats, state actors like Russia and China. I was at a no recording hacker conference and went and heard some very interesting talks about um, uh, 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 Chinese manufactured um, Android TV boxes that people can use to pirate all their favorite shows or whatever, and you can buy them at Walmart and stuff, and they come
Right.
prepackaged with Chinese malware. And then the year before at the same conference, I heard about um, someone who had uh, 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 so he had managed to hack back a Chinese hacker. So this was kind of wild. The Chinese hackers were using a knockoff of a command and control software called Cobalt Strike. And Cobalt Strike was developed by an American. It's used in by red teams and in offensive cyber operations professionally and in the government and things like that. When they were, but they had basically had their own like knockoff version of that. But because it was based on the same code, it had a vulnerability that had been present in Cobalt Strike, and they hadn't patched that vulnerability. So he actually used a vulnerability in their hacking software to hack back on them and and had found himself, on the computer of a Chinese contractor, off doing doing offensive cyber hacking for China. So it was there's so many there's a whole there's a lot of there's a number of UFO conferences and things like that. We can go talk about UFO stuff. There's a far greater number of hacking conferences where people are sharing war stories and talking about the latest techniques and sharing their cybersecurity research. And that's a whole, a rich culture that is tapped into. Um,
So fascinating. Someone who's, likes it, I'd rather be on the wall, kind of like a fly on the wall, just learning and listening. So I like to go to a conference just to learn more about what's happening and how it affects, yeah, like national security. Not so much the practical of doing it, because gosh, that's not my forte whatsoever. But I think it's fascinating behind the scenes. I want to go back though to the one thing you said about the Chinese at home kind of TV, I guess boxes you would call them.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
would that be a form of spyware then? Like this is my ignorance, but I would imagine that being able to have that, which would probably be obviously hugely against the law, you can't do in North America, especially in Canada or the States. But potentially, could that be some spyware because people are buying it? So then, you have hackers or other people that are able to hack into those systems and be able to learn more and listen in to North American families and what's happening, to literally the average Joe that lives in Alabama all the way to someone like myself living in Toronto. Is that again, it's against the law, but there could be a huge possibility that could happen.
Yeah. Some of the uh, yes, it is probably being used for spying. One of the stories that someone told was that they got one of these boxes and plugged it into their lab, and every security certificate, every SSL, the H and HTTPS, every SSL certificate on their entire network changed. So they all got rolled so that they could be listened in on and man in the middle and spied on. And that all of this stuff was being phoned home to China. So yeah. And I think it's very, they are targeting the average American, just to have the same, the National Security Agency has their panopticon surveillance, and China wants to have their panopticon surveillance just the same, on uh th- they want to see everything that the U.S. citizens are doing, just like the NSA wants to see everything that U.S. citizens are doing.
For sure. And I also just have this theory that, for example, Balloon Gate, right? All the
Yeah,
balloons being shot down. I
yeah,
do have this theory that because the obviously China knew that that wasn't on our radar, right? It wasn't under a classification to look for in any air pass, any airways, nothing like that. So they knew that they could get away with it, right? Which, mind you, is a massive balloon with a huge payload. It wasn't, it looks very small on TV, but it was really big. But this wasn't happening once; it's been happening consistently. So I don't think it's very far off to be able to then, again, highly against the law, those balloons are as well for surveillance, be able to say, hey, let's put this into, little TV boxes and be able to listen in, because it's so much cheaper to buy. Gosh, you could put them in Temu products. Like
yeah,
there's so many simple ways to do it. And the reason why I say that is sometimes I think what we think is so sophisticated, it actually is very smart for the Chinese or for any foreign adversary to think that use things that are not very sophisticated because we're always
yeah,
looking now for something that is. Why not go back to something that was an 80s or a 70s or a 60s kind of model or even a 90s model, even early 2000s when it comes to technology, because we would assume that they're using better technology, right? So to me, I think it would be a smart tactic to do because we probably wouldn't have it on our radar. Same with the balloons.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And what you said earlier about kind of I was almost uh everything's old is new again, right? And uh, uh commonly I'll be reading a write up on a new hacking technique or something like that, and it turns out to just be something that's repurposed about a legacy system or something from decades ago that no one has updated or no one has looked at. And yeah, I mean, my favorite class of vulnerabilities came back in vogue in 2015 and they were already old at that point. So like deserialization vulnerabilities happen in a number of languages and a number of products, and they just they're still present. If you follow the security advisories of the latest vulnerabilities, you'll see a new deserialization vulnerability on a pretty regular basis. Um,
My last question to you is when looking at the UFO topic now, what are UFO hackers hacking and who are the UFO hackers, if you know of any, if it's not yourself?
yeah. No, this is a great question. And no, I am not targeting military or government computer systems looking for evidence of UFOs.
Fair enough.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, uh, all of the UFO hackers who I've talked to said that they do not suggest that, and they do, they've faced prosecution, they no. Um, who are the UFO hackers today, and and what are they finding, or what are they capable of finding? I I don't know. I'm not sure there are active. Well, so Anonymous, you mentioned Anonymous.
I was just gonna ask you to be honest. The last thing I was gonna say to you is where's Anonymous in all this? Because you would think that they would have attached themselves so fast to the UFO topic. They didn't, when they first came out. It was
Yeah.
more about government, but now we're so in bed with government. Well, it always has been, but more publicly, UFOs and government in bed. Like, where are they then? Like, I would
I
think that they would be one of our hackers, but we have
I
heard nothing.
Yes. So Anonymous did put out like a video that was that encouraged UFO that I forget what they called it, op something, um uh and but they so there was a loosely organized anonymous initiative to try and find UFO stuff. And I'm in contact with one of those people. He is he is more of a UFO researcher and and just kind of like, someone who's into the topic than he is actively hacking stuff these days. But um but he is connected with Anonymous. Um yeah. I don't think he would mind me saying, but he goes by a non-knowledge. And he's on Twitter. And he's kind of come out with his name recently. So, but he'd written he met with General Albert Stubblebine in the 2010s. And so he has a lot of kind of insider information from a ufology perspective, and he's written blog posts about it, and he's very active on Twitter talking about it. But he's connected with Anonymous and has knows the people who run Anonymous's social media accounts. So the Anonymous social media account that put out the op UFO or whatever it was, he amplified that.
I see them every day on my Twitter, and I know Elon Musk always says this is the fake anonymous, but and I'm not sure if there are or not. I haven't dug a little bit deeper in it, but I do follow them
Mhm.
just because I find that the tweeting is or I guess the X posting, I don't know what you call it now anymore, is
Yeah.
hilarious from them, who's ever running that Twitter account or X account.
I'm pretty cautious when it comes to the current state of UFO hacking. I think that um, the U.S. government kind of learned its lesson from these cases in the 90s and 2000s, and that they've increased their cybersecurity. Um, there's probably stuff happening on a nation state level that is a lot better funded and a lot more sophisticated. Russia's probably trying to hack our secrets related to UFOs and everything else. China's probably trying to hack our secrets related to UFOs and everything else. Um, but when it comes to like the kind of civilian kind of hacker underground kind of thing, um, I don't see any major revelations as uh as quite likely coming forward from that. I'm just not very optimistic about say a big anonymous uh you know uh uh WikiLeaks dump of all of the UFO documents that they hacked their way into. Um uh
They're
I
too busy with politics.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to see that happen because I'm a disclosure activist, advocate, and I I just don't know. It's been decades since we've heard of any high profile UFO hacking incidents like McKinnon, and uh, it's just been quiet. It's been quiet. That's my answer to your question.
Yeah, it's been fairly quiet. I'd say so too, because I think we would have heard something for sure. You would have, and I would have heard it through the grapevine. But I guess now, really, my last question to you is: I would imagine it's possible that foreign adversaries have hacked into systems and maybe came across UAP material and it was just holding on to it. And then maybe one day we could look at a foreign adversary that would be able to, or even just another country, it doesn't have to be an adversary that's hacked in, and we'll be releasing those documents. Maybe not Americans or American government.
That is a very interesting thought. Um, yeah. Um, I mean, I know that when the Soviet Union collapsed, we saw some of their UFO files get released, kind of in that shakeup. Um, uh, I I don't know. It's a very interesting geopolitical question. Um, because it's not just about um, UFOs. It's about the national interests, of these superpowers, um, uh, trying to outmaneuver one another. The if you get into the ufology side of ARVs and alien reproduction vehicles, um, um, uh, it's said that we have our own reverse engineered craft in the United States, and that our near peer adversaries also have their own reverse engineered craft. Um, and so um, uh, it's possible that we there are sightings of both of those, and that we're probably more likely to get like a sighting than we are like the blueprints for them.
For sure.
um and there is, and man, you could really get into this too. If you look at anti-gravity researchers like Ning Li that went between the United States and China, and there's you know uh, uh, we've heard from people like Dave Grush and Carl Nell about this sub rosa arms race between us and our near peer adversaries. And if you really dig into it, there's some stuff there. Like I mentioned, the anti-gravity researcher Ning Li, and uh, some of these uh, I'm certain that these classified technologies are are being worked on, and that there's an entire um, espionage uh, factor to the reverse engineering programs, that has to be considered at the same time as the program secrecy is concerned. The international espionage has to also be considered because of these competing programs.
For sure. Yeah, and I don't think it's far off to think that our adversaries have the same technology, right? Like it's not. I know everyone wants to think that we have it all, but from what we're seeing within defense, and we didn't even get into quantum computing, geez,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
As I've said many times on this podcast, China is beating us in any form of technology around quantum computing. So it's a scary time, and also the guard is changing now politically too. So who knows what information they have or what information will be shared in the next coming years, maybe even this year, right? People not being part of the Five Eyes. Right now, I know that the states, President Trump is not letting the Ukraine in on any intel that's going on and not allowed to. So there will be a massive change in the guard, and I would imagine UAP would go with it. So maybe potentially with the changing of the guard and the way that new alliances are happening, maybe disclosure or form of disclosure will come from that too. We'll see.
yeah. We live in interesting times.
Oh yeah, I think I've always said to friends, I'm like, there is probably a reason why all of us are born during this time. It just has to be. But thank you so much, Thom. And with that said, thank you for being rebelliously curious with me today. I find the hacking stuff so interesting, and so it's great. When I met you at Seoul, I was like, perfect. I was like, because I think internally, in a previous life, maybe I was a little hacker myself, because one of my best friends is as well, and I love just listening to her talk about it. So thank you for joining me today, and I'll look forward to having you back on the podcast sometime soon.
Happy to talk anytime. Thank you so
That's
much,
all.
Chrissy.
Thanks.